She believed the transfer would last a few weeks, that it was temporary, that if she kept her head down, everything would return to normal. Eleanor Muller was wrong. Before we begin, subscribing costs nothing, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep sharing stories like this. Now, let's begin. The room was silent when Eleanor Muller realized she was about to lose everything she had built. Not fired, not screamed at, not humiliated in public. Something worse. Her phone vibrated once on the desk, a short message from her supervisor that felt harmless at first glance. "Can you stop by my office? We need to discuss a small adjustment." A small adjustment. That was how it always began. Eleanor Muller closed the document she had been reviewing, straightened the sleeves of her blouse, and took a slow breath. She had learned over the years how to walk into rooms like this with calm precision. No hesitation, no fear, no invitation for weakness. When she knocked, the door was already open. Richard Hale looked up from his desk with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Eleanor," Richard Hale said warmly, "come in, sit." Eleanor Muller did not sit right away. She waited. That, too, was a habit, one she had developed after years of subtle power games. "What's the adjustment?" Eleanor asked. Richard Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced behind his head, as if the conversation were casual, friendly, almost generous. "We're restructuring a few departments," Richard said, "and I think you'd be perfect for a new role." Eleanor Muller felt it then, a quiet tightening in her chest, not panic, recognition. "A new role?" Eleanor repeated. "I wasn't informed there were changes coming." Richard smiled again, slower this time. "That's because this one was personal," he said lightly. "I trust you." Eleanor Muller finally sat down. "What would the role involve?" she asked. Richard stood, walked around the desk, and leaned against it, close enough that Eleanor could smell his cologne. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze. "You'd be relocating to the archival unit," Richard said. "Different building, fewer interactions, more independence." Eleanor Muller blinked. "The archival unit?" she asked. "That department hasn't handled active projects in years." Richard shrugged. "That's precisely why it needs someone competent." Eleanor Muller understood then, completely. Months earlier, she had stood in this same office, same chair, same desk, same smile. But that day, Richard Hale had closed the door. "You know," Richard had said back then, lowering his voice, "people like us work better when there's trust." Eleanor had smiled politely. "I agree." "And trust," Richard continued, stepping closer, "usually grows when two people allow things to become less formal." Eleanor Muller had taken one step back. "I'm here to work," Eleanor had said calmly, "nothing more." The smile had vanished from Richard's face for just half a second. Now, months later, the smile was back, perfect, polished. "This is a great opportunity," Richard said. "Of course, if you feel it's not a good fit—" Eleanor Muller looked up at him. "I don't," she said, "but I'll take it." Richard's eyebrows lifted, surprised, then pleased. "Excellent," he said. "You start Monday." Je te pense. The archival building was on the edge of the corporate campus, older, quieter, forgotten. The walls were beige. The lights hummed softly. The windows barely opened. At first, Eleanor Muller told herself it would be fine. She told herself that work was work, no matter where it happened. That dignity came from within, that she could endure. And for a while she did. She organized files no one had touched in years. She reviewed outdated reports. She answered emails that arrived days late, if they arrived at all. No meetings, no collaboration, no recognition, just silence. Weeks passed, then months. The work that once energized her now felt like an echo of something she used to be good at. Eleanor Muller still arrived on time, still dressed with care, still did what was asked. But something inside her began to dim. One afternoon, as she struggled to stay awake over a stack of irrelevant documents, someone knocked gently on the open door. "Sorry," a man's voice said. "I think I'm lost." Eleanor Muller looked up. He was standing awkwardly in the doorway, holding a folder against his chest like a shield, tall, slightly disheveled, kind eyes that looked apologetic rather than curious. "This is the archival unit," Eleanor said. "You're probably very lost." The man laughed softly. "That explains a lot." He stepped inside. "I'm Andrew Collins." "Eleanor Muller," she replied. Andrew Collins glanced around the room. "This place feels forgotten." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "That's generous." Andrew shifted his weight. "I'm supposed to deliver these to records, but no one seems to know where that is." "That would be here," Eleanor said, standing. As she moved around the desk, her foot caught on the edge of a loose carpet. She stumbled. Andrew reacted instantly, dropping the folder and reaching out. His hands caught her arms, steady, but gentle, too close, close enough for Eleanor to feel the warmth of his palms through her sleeves. "I've got you," Andrew said quickly. Eleanor froze for half a second. Then she laughed softly. "Thank you." Andrew released her immediately, stepping back as if afraid he had crossed a line. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to—" "It's fine," Eleanor said. "You saved me from a very undignified fall." Andrew smiled, relieved. As he handed her the folder, their fingers brushed, just for a moment. But Eleanor felt it, something human. After he left, the room felt quieter than before. Days later, Andrew Collins returned. "I found myself lost again," Andrew said, standing at the door with a sheepish grin. Eleanor looked up from her desk. "That seems to be a pattern." "Maybe," Andrew said, "or maybe I was hoping you'd help." She did. They began talking. About small things at first, weather, coffee, the strange loneliness of large companies. Andrew never asked why Eleanor was there, never hinted that she didn't belong. He simply treated her as if she mattered. And that, unexpectedly, made the silence heavier when he wasn't around. Meanwhile, Richard Hale noticed the change. Eleanor Muller's reports were still correct, still acceptable, but no longer exceptional. One morning, an email arrived. "Performance review. My office. Today." Eleanor stared at the screen for a long time. That evening, as she packed her bag, Andrew appeared at the door. "You look tired," Andrew said gently. Eleanor hesitated, then spoke. "I think I'm being pushed out," Eleanor said quietly. Andrew frowned. "For what reason?" Eleanor met his eyes. "For saying no," she said. Andrew said nothing, but something in his expression hardened. Not anger. Resolve. And Eleanor Muller did not know it yet. But the quiet life she had been forced into was about to collide with a choice that would change everything. The hallway outside Richard Hale's office smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive air freshener. The kind that tried too hard, the kind that reminded Eleanor Muller that power always came wrapped in something pleasant. She stood there for 3 long breaths before knocking. "Come in," Richard Hale called, his voice smooth, almost cheerful. Eleanor Muller entered with her chin lifted. She refused to look like someone walking into judgment. Richard Hale didn't invite her to sit this time. He stayed behind his desk, scrolling through something on a tablet, as if she were an interruption. "Eleanor," Richard said, still not looking up, "we need to talk about your output." Eleanor kept her face neutral. "My output has been consistent." Richard finally looked up, eyes calm, mouth relaxed. Too relaxed. "Consistent," Richard repeated. "That's a polite word for declining." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Declining compared to what standard?" Richard tapped the tablet once. "Compared to you." He stood and walked around his desk, stopping near the window, staring out as if the view mattered more than the person in the room. "I promoted you because you were extraordinary," Richard said casually. "Now you're ordinary." Eleanor felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her tone even. You moved me to a department with no active projects, Eleanor said. What exactly do you want me to produce? Richard turned slowly, and Eleanor knew what was coming before he said it. I want you to stop resisting, Richard said softly. Eleanor's pulse jumped. I'm not resisting, Eleanor said. I'm working, Richard smiled. You're surviving. There's a difference. Eleanor held his gaze. What is this really about, Richard Hale? He walked closer, too close. He lowered his voice as if the walls had ears. You could have had an easier life, Richard whispered. You chose pride. Eleanor Muller took one step back, not dramatic, not fearful, just enough to make the boundary visible. My personal life is not part of my performance review, Eleanor said. Richard's smile thinned. Everything is part of it when I'm your supervisor. Eleanor Muller stared at him, and for the first time in a long time she considered saying something reckless. Something that would feel like justice in the moment. But she needed her paycheck. She needed stability. She needed to be smart. So she nodded once. Noted. Richard's eyes gleamed. Good. Then here's the plan. You'll stay in the archival unit, and you'll take on an additional assignment. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Additional assignment? Richard nodded. You'll start compiling internal compliance documentation. You'll report directly to me. Weekly meetings. Eleanor understood the trap. A weekly meeting in his office. A leash disguised as responsibility. I'd like that in writing, Eleanor said. Richard laughed lightly. Eleanor, you always were charmingly cautious. Eleanor didn't smile. In writing, Richard Hale? His expression shifted. The charm did not disappear, it sharpened. Of course, Richard said, I'll send it. Eleanor left the office feeling as if her skin were too tight for her body. She walked back to the archival building with a calm face and a trembling stomach. When she opened the door to her unit, Andrew Collins was standing inside, looking at the shelves like a man who had wandered into a museum. Andrew turned quickly. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know if you were here yet. Eleanor blinked. How did you get in? Andrew held up a key card. The receptionist upstairs gave me temporary access. She said you might be able to help me again. Eleanor gave him a tired look. So you're lost, Andrew smiled. Hopelessly. Eleanor exhaled a laugh she didn't mean to release. It surprised her, and it softened something inside her. What are you looking for this time? Eleanor asked. Andrew approached her desk and placed a small paper cup down carefully. Coffee, Andrew said. I noticed you never leave this building, and I thought you might be running on dust. Eleanor stared at the cup. No one brought her coffee here. No one thought about her here. You didn't have to do that, Eleanor said. Andrew shrugged. I wanted to. Eleanor hesitated, then took the cup. Their fingers brushed again, and this time she didn't pull away too fast. Andrew tilted his head. Bad day? Eleanor's instinct was to say no. She had trained herself for years to keep work pain locked behind her ribs. But Andrew Collins's face was open. No agenda, no calculation. So Eleanor Muller spoke the truth in a single sentence. I feel like I'm disappearing, Eleanor said. Andrew's expression changed. He didn't pity her. He didn't rush to fix it. He simply listened. I don't think you're disappearing, Andrew said quietly. I think you're being hidden. Eleanor's throat tightened. Andrew added, with a small, almost teasing smile, and whoever tried to hide you clearly forgot that some people have a habit of getting lost. Eleanor laughed, and it sounded real. For a moment, the fluorescent hum of the building felt less cruel. Andrew glanced at her desk, at the neat stack of papers, the notes scribbled in the margins. You write a lot, Andrew said. Eleanor froze slightly. I used to, not anymore. Andrew's eyes flickered to the corner of a notebook. What is that? Eleanor reached instinctively to cover it, but it was too late. Andrew read the title softly as if it were something fragile. Eleanor Muller, Andrew said, smiling. This looks like a story. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. It's nothing. Andrew held up his hands. I'm not judging. I like stories. Eleanor stared at him. Why? Andrew's smile faded into something more honest. Because stories are where people put the things they can't say out loud. Eleanor's heart beat harder. She didn't know why. But the simple way he said it made her feel exposed, like he had seen into a part of her she had been keeping dark for years. She cleared her throat. So what are you actually here for, Andrew Collins? Andrew looked slightly guilty. I did need to drop off those files, but yes, I was also hoping I'd see you. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, half amused. You're terrible at pretending you're not doing that, Andrew chuckled. I know. He moved toward the shelf, then paused. Do you ever eat lunch? Andrew asked. Eleanor blinked. What? Andrew gestured vaguely. I mean, you're always here. And if you don't leave, that means you either have food hidden in this building or you're surviving on spite. Eleanor laughed again, unexpectedly. Spite is calorie-free. Andrew grinned. That's tragic. Eleanor hesitated. The instinct to decline rose up automatically. She didn't go to lunch. She didn't accept invitations. She didn't get attached. But then she remembered Richard Hale's smile, his control, and she thought suddenly, why should she keep shrinking? I have 30 minutes, Eleanor said. Andrew's eyes widened slightly. That's generous. Eleanor lifted her bag. Don't make it weird. Andrew held up his hands. I promise, Eleanor Muller, I'm a professional at not making things weird. The cafeteria was louder than Eleanor expected. She hadn't been there in months. People glanced at her, some recognizing her, some not. Andrew walked beside her, not too close, but close enough that she didn't feel alone. At the counter, Eleanor reached for her wallet. Andrew immediately shook his head. No, Eleanor frowned. Andrew, I can pay for my own lunch? Andrew leaned closer, voice playful. Eleanor Muller, if you take that wallet out, you'll ruin my entire plan. Eleanor blinked. Your plan? Andrew smiled. My plan to remind you you're still a person who deserves lunch? Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't know what to say to that, so she let him pay. They sat near a window. Sunlight warmed Eleanor's hands. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been. Andrew took a bite of his sandwich and then said, too casually, So, who is making you disappear? Eleanor's stomach tightened. No one. It's just work. Andrew's eyes didn't move away. Eleanor Muller, you can tell me the truth without giving me the details. Eleanor swallowed. My supervisor, Eleanor said quietly. Richard Hale. Andrew's jaw tightened. A quick flash. Gone just as fast. He's the one who transferred you? Andrew asked. Eleanor nodded. Andrew took a slow breath. And it wasn't because of performance. Eleanor's gaze dropped to her hands. It was because I didn't play along, Eleanor said. Andrew's voice softened. Because you said no. Eleanor nodded again, throat tight. She expected Andrew to ask questions, to push, to try to be a hero. Instead, Andrew Collins did something else. He reached across the table and placed his hand near hers, not touching, not forcing, just near enough that Eleanor could feel the warmth of him like an offer. If you ever need someone to stand next to you, Andrew said quietly, I can do that. Eleanor's eyes lifted. Why would you? Andrew gave her a small smile, embarrassed by his own honesty. Because I think you're good, Andrew said, and I think people like Richard Hale count on good people being too tired to fight. Eleanor stared at him. Something inside her, something that had been numb for months, shifted. On the way back, as they walked through the hallway, Andrew glanced at her, then looked away too quickly. What? Eleanor asked. Andrew cleared his throat. Nothing. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Andrew Collins. Andrew sighed dramatically. Fine, I was just thinking. You smile different when you're not in that building. Eleanor's heart stumbled. Do I? Andrew nodded. Yes? Eleanor tried to act unimpressed. That's a strange observation. Andrew grinned. I'm a strange man. Eleanor shook her head, but the warmth stayed in her chest. When they reached the archival unit, Eleanor turned to say goodbye. Andrew hesitated. "Eleanor?" "Yes?" Andrew shifted, suddenly nervous. "Can I ask you something? And you can say no." Eleanor's stomach tightened again, old instincts flaring. But Andrew's eyes weren't hungry. They were careful, respectful. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. Andrew held up the notebook he had seen earlier. "Can I read your story?" Eleanor's breath caught. No one had asked her that in years. She should say no. She should protect herself. Stories were dangerous. Stories were where she hid the parts of her that still hoped. But then she remembered Andrew's hand near hers on the table, the way he hadn't pushed, the way he had offered presence, not rescue. Eleanor hesitated. "You can read one page," Eleanor said. Andrew's face lit up like a boy given permission to touch something sacred. "One page," Andrew promised. He leaned down, picked up the notebook gently, and as he did his shoulder bumped hers. Eleanor flinched instinctively, then relaxed when she realized it was an accident. Andrew froze. "Sorry," Eleanor exhaled. "You're very apologetic." Andrew smiled. "It's my brand." Eleanor laughed softly, and the sound surprised her again. But as Andrew left, holding her story like it mattered, Eleanor Muller didn't see the shadow moving across the glass of her office door. Richard Hale was watching from the hallway. His smile was back, and this time it looked like strategy. Eleanor Muller knew something had shifted the moment Richard Hale stopped pretending. The email arrived early the next morning, flagged as urgent. "Weekly check-in, my office, noon." No greeting, no pleasantry, just control. Eleanor stared at the screen longer than necessary, then closed her laptop and stood. Her reflection in the dark monitor looked composed, but her stomach was tight. She told herself it was just another meeting, another conversation she would survive. But when she stepped into Richard Hale's office, the door closed behind her with deliberate slowness. Richard Hale didn't ask her to sit. He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the campus, as if the world beyond the glass belonged to him. "I saw you yesterday," Richard said calmly. Eleanor felt a cold line trace down her spine. "Saw me where?" "In the cafeteria," Richard replied, turning slowly. "With Andrew Collins." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed steady. "Is that relevant to my work?" Richard smiled. "Everything is relevant when patterns change." Eleanor crossed her arms. "I didn't realize lunch required authorization." Richard chuckled softly. "You didn't used to eat lunch." Eleanor met his eyes. "People change." Richard stepped closer, not enough to touch her, enough to remind her he could. "I promoted you because you were focused," Richard said. "Now, you're distracted." Eleanor inhaled slowly. "If this meeting is about my performance, I'd like specifics." Richard tilted his head. "It's about loyalty." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "My loyalty is to my job." Richard's smile faded just slightly. "No, Eleanor, your loyalty used to be to me." The words landed heavily between them. "I was never loyal to you," Eleanor said. "I was professional." Richard's eyes hardened. "Careful." Eleanor didn't step back. "I've been careful for months." Richard studied her, then sighed theatrically, as if disappointed. "You could have avoided all of this," Richard said. "You still could." Eleanor's heart pounded. "Avoid what exactly?" Richard leaned in, his voice low. "Isolation, scrutiny, being slowly pushed out until no one notices." Eleanor felt anger flare, sharp and clean. "Is that a threat?" Eleanor asked. Richard straightened. "It's advice." Eleanor held his gaze. "Then here's mine. Keep this conversation professional." Richard laughed softly. "You really think Andrew Collins is going to save you?" Eleanor froze for half a second. "This conversation is over." Richard's smile returned. "For now?" When Eleanor left the office, her hands were trembling. She walked quickly back to the archival building, heart racing, thoughts colliding. By the time she reached her door, she felt hollowed out. Andrew Collins was already there. He stood awkwardly near her desk, holding her notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're back," Andrew said, looking up. "I didn't know when." Eleanor dropped her bag and leaned against the door. "Andrew, I need a minute." Andrew immediately set the notebook down. Of course. He didn't ask questions. He didn't move closer. He simply waited. Eleanor closed her eyes and pressed her fingers to her temples. "He knows," Eleanor said quietly. Andrew's posture shifted. "Who?" "My supervisor, Richard Hale," Eleanor said. "He knows about you, about us. Talking." Andrew frowned. "That shouldn't matter." "It does to him," Eleanor said. "Everything does." Andrew took a careful step closer. "Did he say something inappropriate?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "He implied I could make things easier if I stopped resisting." Andrew's jaw tightened. "That's not okay." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "It never is, but it happens." Andrew looked at her with something fierce and gentle at the same time. "Eleanor Muller, you shouldn't have to endure that alone." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't want you involved." Andrew exhaled slowly. "You don't get to decide that for me." Eleanor looked up. "Andrew, I'm not saying I'll fight your battles," Andrew said quickly. "I'm saying I won't pretend not to see what's happening." The silence between them stretched, charged and fragile. Andrew gestured to the notebook. "I read your page." Eleanor's breath caught. "And?" Andrew swallowed. "It's honest, painfully honest." Eleanor's voice trembled. "That's not a compliment." "It is," Andrew said softly, "because it means you're still alive in there." Eleanor turned away, blinking back emotion. "I used to be better," Eleanor said, "at work, at believing I mattered." Andrew stepped closer without thinking, his hand brushing her arm accidentally. "Oh, sorry," Andrew said quickly. Eleanor felt the warmth of his touch linger long after he pulled away. "I don't think you stopped being good," Andrew said. "I think someone worked very hard to make you forget it." Eleanor turned to face him. Their distance had closed without either of them noticing. "You shouldn't say things like that," Eleanor said quietly. Andrew's voice dropped. "Why?" "Because I might start believing you," Eleanor replied. Andrew held her gaze. "I hope you do." Their eyes locked. For a moment, neither of them moved. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. She could feel the space between them thinning. Andrew leaned in slightly, then stopped. "I don't want to cross a line," Andrew said. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "What line?" Andrew searched her face. "The one where I hurt you by wanting something you're not ready to give." Eleanor's breath hitched. "And what do you want, Andrew Collins?" Andrew hesitated. "I want to stand with you. And yes, I want more than that." Eleanor closed the distance without thinking. Her foot caught on the chair leg. She stumbled forward, and Andrew reacted instinctively, catching her waist. This time, he didn't let go immediately. Their faces were inches apart. "I keep falling around you," Eleanor murmured. Andrew smiled softly. "I'm starting to think it's not an accident." For a second, Eleanor thought he might kiss her. He didn't. Instead, Andrew rested his forehead lightly against hers, just for a breath. "That was close," Andrew said quietly. Eleanor laughed softly, breathless. Too close. But neither of them moved away right away. Later that afternoon, Eleanor received another email. "Additional compliance tasks attached. Deadline moved up. Failure to meet expectations will be noted." Her hand shook as she read it. Andrew noticed immediately. "What is it?" Eleanor showed him the screen. "He's setting me up to fail." Andrew's expression hardened. "Then we don't let him." Eleanor looked at him. "Andrew, you don't understand how this works?" Andrew nodded slowly. "Maybe not. But I understand documentation, and patterns, and people who think they're untouchable." Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" Andrew met her gaze. "I work in internal auditing." Eleanor's breath caught. "You never mentioned that." Andrew shrugged. "You never asked." Something clicked into place. Andrew continued calmly, "And Richard Hale has been flagged before. Quietly. Nothing ever stuck." Eleanor's heart raced. "So what are you saying?" Andrew took a breath. "I'm saying that sometimes the most dangerous people fall because they underestimate the quiet ones." Eleanor stared at him, a mix of fear and hope colliding in her chest. "Andrew," Eleanor said softly, "if you do this, he'll come after you too." Andrew smiled, gentle but certain. He already has. That evening, as Eleanor walked to her car, she felt watched, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The mistake Richard Hale made was believing silence meant safety. It started small, a compliance request sent too quickly, a meeting scheduled without witnesses, a message written late at night, careless in its confidence. Eleanor Muller noticed the pattern before Andrew Collins said a word. "He's rushing," Eleanor said quietly, standing beside Andrew at her desk. "He's impatient." Andrew nodded. "People like him always are when they feel power slipping." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Or when they think no one is watching." Andrew looked at her, thoughtful. "Someone is." Eleanor's days became heavier, the deadlines were tighter, the expectations deliberately vague. Richard Hale called her into his office twice that week, always alone, always with the same calm smile. "You're underperforming," Richard said on Thursday, tapping a file. "This isn't like you." Eleanor met his eyes. "You removed every condition that allowed me to perform." Richard leaned back. "Excuses are rarely attractive." Eleanor stood. "Then perhaps we should move this conversation to HR." For the first time, Richard Hale's smile cracked. "Be careful," Richard said softly. "People who make noise often don't last." Eleanor's voice was steady. "People who abuse silence don't either." When she left, her legs felt weak, but her spine felt straighter than it had in months. That afternoon, Andrew found her sitting on the floor of the archival room, back against a shelf, staring at nothing. Andrew knelt in front of her immediately. "Hey, what happened?" Eleanor tried to smile. Failed. "I'm tired." Andrew's hand hovered near her knee, not touching. "Do you want me to sit with you, or do you want solutions?" Eleanor let out a shaky breath. "Sit." Andrew sat beside her, their shoulders brushing lightly. Eleanor didn't pull away. They stayed like that for a long moment, the hum of the building filling the space. "If this story is touching you in some way," Eleanor said quietly, more to herself than to Andrew, "you're not alone." Andrew glanced at her. "What did you say?" Eleanor shook her head, embarrassed. "Nothing, just something I write." Andrew smiled softly. "Stories like that exist for people who feel deeply. If that's you, you're in the right place." Eleanor looked at him, surprised by how perfectly the words landed. She rested her head against the shelf and closed her eyes. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Eleanor said. Andrew's voice was gentle. "You don't have to decide today." Their hands brushed accidentally as Eleanor shifted. This time, Andrew didn't pull away immediately. "Eleanor," Andrew said carefully, "there's something you should know." Eleanor opened her eyes. "About Richard." Andrew nodded. "I started reviewing his compliance trail, quietly. He's sloppy when he thinks he's untouchable." Eleanor's heart began to race. "Andrew, this could cost you your job." Andrew met her gaze. "Some things are worth the risk." Eleanor studied his face, seeing resolve, not recklessness. "You shouldn't do this because of me," Eleanor said. Andrew smiled faintly. "I'm not." That evening, as they walked to the parking lot together, rain began to fall without warning. Eleanor fumbled for her keys, distracted. Andrew stepped closer instinctively, holding his jacket over both of them. Their bodies brushed, too close, too warm. "I'm sorry," Andrew said, breath uneven. Eleanor looked up at him. "Why do you always apologize?" Andrew laughed quietly. "Because I'm very aware of you." Eleanor's heart skipped. Thunder cracked overhead. Eleanor startled, stepping back too quickly. She slipped on the wet pavement. Andrew caught her, arms wrapping around her waist. They froze. Rain soaked their clothes. Eleanor's hands rested against Andrew's chest. She could feel his heart racing as fast as hers. "Eleanor," Andrew said softly. She looked up at him, their faces inches apart. Her breath caught. For a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. Then Eleanor pulled back, laughing nervously. "I think I need to stop falling around you." Andrew smiled, breathless. "I think I need to stop being where you fall." They stood there, soaked and smiling like fools. The next morning everything changed. Eleanor arrived to find her access restricted, her computer locked, her email disabled. A message waited at reception. "HR meeting immediate." Andrew was already there when she arrived, standing outside the conference room, jaw tight. "They're moving fast," Andrew said quietly. "Too fast." Inside, Richard Hale sat with a representative from HR, polite, calm, prepared. "Eleanor Muller," Richard said, folding his hands. "We're concerned about recent performance issues and breaches of protocol." Eleanor's chest tightened. "What breaches?" Richard slid a document across the table. "Unauthorized access to internal documents." Eleanor stared at it. "This is false." Andrew stepped forward. "It's not." Richard turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Andrew placed his badge on the table. "Because I'm the one who accessed those files, with authorization." The room went silent. Richard's face paled just slightly. "You had no reason to—" "I had every reason," Andrew said calmly. "Internal audit." The HR representative blinked. "This wasn't communicated to us." Andrew nodded. "It wasn't meant to be." Eleanor looked at Andrew, stunned. Richard forced a smile. "This is highly irregular." Andrew met his gaze. "So is retaliation." The word hung in the air like a crack of thunder. HR cleared her throat. "We'll need to review this." Andrew nodded. "You should." Including the messages Richard Hale sent Eleanor Muller outside work hours. Eleanor's breath caught. Richard stood abruptly. "This is outrageous." Andrew's voice was steady. "It's documented." Richard's eyes flicked to Eleanor, sharp and calculating. "This isn't over," Richard said. Andrew stepped closer to Eleanor, not touching her, but unmistakably there. "It is," Andrew replied. As they left the room, Eleanor's legs trembled. In the hallway she turned to Andrew. "You didn't have to do that." Andrew smiled softly. "Yes?" "I did." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Andrew hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Because I don't want a world where someone like you disappears." Eleanor's heart broke open. She stepped forward and hugged him before she could stop herself. Andrew froze for half a second, then wrapped his arms around her gently. They held each other in the quiet hallway, the future uncertain but no longer terrifying. And Eleanor Muller knew, with a clarity that surprised her, that even if she lost everything else, she had found someone who stood beside her. Richard Hale did not lose control loudly. That was never his style. He lost it quietly, with precision, the way men like him always did when cornered. The first sign came 2 days later, when Eleanor Muller received a message from HR requesting a clarification meeting. The tone was polite, neutral, dangerous. Andrew Collins read the email over her shoulder. "He's buying time," Andrew said. "That means he's planning something." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." Andrew turned to her. "Then let's make sure it ends." They sat together in the archival unit, papers spread across the desk, screens glowing softly in the dim light. Andrew moved with focus, opening files, cross-checking timestamps, flagging inconsistencies. "He reused the same language," Andrew said. "Over and over." He thought charm was enough. Eleanor watched him, struck by how calm he looked. "You're very good at this." Andrew smiled faintly. "I don't like bullies." Eleanor hesitated. "You're risking everything." Andrew looked up at her. "So are you." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A quiet agreement, a shared line they had already crossed. That afternoon, Richard Hale requested a private meeting with Eleanor. Andrew shook his head immediately. No. Eleanor swallowed. If I don't go, he'll claim I'm uncooperative. Andrew considered this, then nodded once. Then I'll be nearby. Richard Hale's office felt smaller than before. He stood as Eleanor entered, hands clasped, expression carefully wounded. Eleanor, Richard said softly, I never wanted this to become adversarial. Eleanor remained standing. Then you should have kept it professional. Richard sighed. You misunderstand me. Eleanor met his gaze. I understand you very well. Richard's smile vanished. You're making a mistake aligning yourself with Andrew Collins. Eleanor felt her heart pound, but her voice did not shake. I didn't align myself with him. He noticed. Richard leaned closer. And you think that makes you safe? Eleanor took one step back. It makes me honest. Richard's eyes darkened. Honesty is dangerous in the wrong hands. Eleanor straightened. So is power. Richard laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. You're not as important as you think, Eleanor Muller. Eleanor tilted her head. That's where you're wrong. When she left the office, Andrew was waiting at the end of the hallway, pretending to scroll on his phone. You okay? Andrew asked. Eleanor nodded. He's afraid. Andrew's mouth tightened. Good. The fallout began the next morning. An internal email circulated quietly at first, then faster, then everywhere. Subject, formal investigation initiated. Names appeared, dates, departments. Richard Hale's. By noon, the whispers had become open conversation. By 3 o'clock, HR requested Eleanor Muller's presence again. This time, the tone was different. Ms. Muller, the HR director said, hands folded carefully, we owe you an apology. Eleanor's chest tightened. For what exactly? For failing to protect you sooner. The words felt unreal. Outside the room, Andrew waited. When Eleanor stepped out, her legs weak, Andrew moved toward her instinctively. It's happening, Eleanor whispered. Andrew nodded. I know. They stood there, surrounded by people who suddenly looked at Eleanor differently, with recognition, with regret, with respect. That evening, Eleanor and Andrew sat in his car in the empty parking lot, neither of them ready to go home. The city lights reflected softly on the windshield. I don't know who I am without all this pressure, Eleanor said quietly. Andrew turned to her. You're Eleanor Muller. That didn't change. Eleanor smiled faintly. You make it sound simple. Andrew hesitated, then spoke carefully. There's something I've been wanting to do. Eleanor's heart skipped. Andrew. I know, Andrew said quickly. Bad timing. I don't want to keep pretending this is only about work. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him. Neither do I, she said. The space between them felt charged, electric and fragile. Andrew reached out slowly, giving her time to stop him. Eleanor didn't. His fingers brushed her hand, light, tentative. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Andrew whispered, Tell me if this isn't okay. Eleanor shook her head. It is. Andrew's thumb traced a small, unconscious circle against her skin. Their faces drifted closer. Eleanor's breath caught. Andrew paused, searching her eyes. Eleanor, Andrew said softly. Yes, she whispered. Their lips met gently, not desperate, not rushed. Just a quiet, deliberate kiss that carried weeks of restraint. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, tears prickling behind her eyes. When they pulled back, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. I should have done that sooner, Andrew murmured. Eleanor laughed softly. No, you did it at the right time. They stayed like that for a moment, suspended between relief and something new. But neither of them saw the figure watching from across the parking lot. Richard Hale stood beside his car, phone pressed to his ear, his expression hard. This isn't finished, he said quietly, and Eleanor Muller did not yet know that Richard Hale's final move would be the most dangerous one. Richard Hale's last move came disguised as concern. The The message arrived late at night. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Privately. This has gone too far." Eleanor stared at the screen, her heart sinking. Andrew Collins read the message beside her. "No," Andrew said immediately. "He doesn't get private anymore." Eleanor swallowed. "If I don't respond, he'll twist it." Andrew took a breath. "Then we do this the right way." The next morning, the meeting happened in a glass-walled conference room. HR representatives present, legal counsel on standby. Richard Hale arrived confident, calm, polished. "Eleanor Muller," Richard said, smiling thinly. "I hope we can resolve this like adults." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "That's all I've wanted from the beginning." Richard folded his hands. "I've always supported you. Everything I did was to help you grow." Andrew didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. The HR director nodded. "Richard, we'll need you to explain the messages sent to Ms. Muller outside work hours." Richard blinked. "Messages?" Andrew placed a folder on the table. "These. Printed emails, text logs, timestamps." Richard's smile faltered. "These were taken out of context," Richard said quickly. Andrew spoke calmly. "Then please explain the context where professional growth requires personal compliance." The room went silent. Richard's face flushed. "This is absurd." Eleanor felt her hands shake, but her voice held. "No," Eleanor said. "What was absurd was believing I had to endure it to survive." Richard turned toward her sharply. "You're exaggerating." Eleanor stood. "For months I was isolated, monitored, punished for refusing something that had nothing to do with my work," Eleanor said. "You counted on my silence. You were wrong." Richard rose halfway from his chair. "This is defamation." The HR director raised a hand. "Sit down, Richard." The authority in her voice ended it. Legal counsel cleared his throat. "Based on documentation and corroboration, we are proceeding with formal termination for misconduct, abuse of authority, and retaliation." Richard froze. Termination. The word landed like a verdict. "This is not over," Richard said, voice low. Andrew met his gaze calmly. "It is." Richard left the room without another word, shoulders rigid, power gone. Eleanor exhaled shakily as the door closed. Later that day, Eleanor sat alone in the archival unit for the last time. She placed her notebook on the desk, running her fingers over the worn cover. Andrew appeared in the doorway. "You don't have to stay here," Andrew said gently. Eleanor smiled. "I know, I just wanted to say goodbye to the woman I was here." Andrew stepped closer. "And who are you now?" Eleanor looked up at him. "Someone who doesn't shrink anymore." Andrew's eyes softened. A week later, Eleanor Muller stood in a small bookstore, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted a stack of printed pages. Andrew watched from the back, quiet pride in his expression. Eleanor cleared her throat and spoke. "This is a story about a woman who thought she was invisible," Eleanor said, "and learned she wasn't." Applause filled the room. Afterward, outside under soft evening light, Eleanor laughed nervously. "I almost ran," Eleanor admitted. Andrew smiled. "You didn't." Eleanor stepped closer. "Because you stood with me." Andrew shook his head. "Because you chose yourself." Eleanor reached for his hand this time. No hesitation. "I choose you too," Eleanor said. Andrew's breath caught. "Eleanor." She pulled him closer, her lips finding his without fear, without restraint. This kiss was not tentative, it was earned. They stayed like that, the world moving quietly around them, two people who had found each other not through rescue, but through respect. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor Muller felt safe, felt seen, felt loved. Before we end, if this story moved you in any way, this channel exists for people who still believe in connection. If that's you, stay with us. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and tell us from 0 to 10 how this story made you feel. because stories like this are written for hearts that refuse to disappear.